I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the inspiration behind Creatitive. I saw that your dad played in the NFL, so you've been around sports your whole entire life. But what gave you the idea to start the company?
I mean, I don't want to go too much into it, but it's always a journey. It's always a journey overall. And I was in the corporate world for almost 10 years after I got my bachelor's in science and on the visual communication side. And, I moved up into the rankings. And while I was doing that, in this industry, you sometimes do freelance work on the side. And I was really passionate about helping people and being in the atmosphere of working with how my dad grew up and how he had me grow up and, do certain things in sports and in the grid and lifestyle and all that stuff. I really saw a need for athletes basically having quality marketing and quality strategy. As I continued to work into the corporate world, I just got to a point where I would learn everything within like 3 months of being there, be doing 100 times more than the other employees on staff. And nothing against them and their work ethic, but it was one of those situations where I was just like, I prefer to be on my own at this point. I have more control over what I'm going to do, how I'm going to get there. And so when I went out on my own, I spent about a year, passionately wanting to work with athletes and athletic related businesses, but really kind of, dabbled into the full service in the broad aspect of things until I slowly, knowing that I was going to get there though, is knowing, hey, this takes time, business takes time. I'm going to take it as I go. So it really hit me about a year or so, but while I was still in the corporate world before I left. And I got offered a gig to fly out to American Express in New York and do a 3-month contract with them. And it was pretty good money in helping them do the wireframing and all that on their website. And I turned it down. And because of the fear of, oh, well, what am I going to do after that 3 months? And about a week later, I contacted them and said, hey, I changed my mind. I want to do it. And they told me they already found someone else. But what that taught me was, okay, one, that I'm ready to go out on my own. And two, just understanding that in the corporate world, there was no guarantee either. There was no guarantee. And through that whole rest of that year, I went through 3 or 4 bosses. They switched things up and processes up quite a bit, laid people off, did, sneaky things on trying to bring lower people up to pay them less and all that nifty stuff, until eventually I just got to a point where I'm like, you know what, I'm ready. So I spent that whole year preparing and saving up a good cash flow so that I could say, all right, now I can live about 1 year at very minimal income just to get my feet on the ground and learn and to grow and to get where I need to be. And everything, I'm not going to say worked out, because business is business and there's always growth patterns, but finally got to a point where, I'm pretty stable and have a good, growth pattern right now. And I think what really got me to work with athletes is because of my dad and because of the situation at hand with seeing these athletes. I saw a lot of athletes, they go through different patterns, and the different patterns that they go through, and it's not the same for every athlete, but as a business owner, you go through these patterns of, you learn from your mistakes, you grow from those mistakes. And I see it the same with my prospects that come in the door, depending on where they're at, price points, hiring someone, as a freelancer, hiring an agency, things of that nature. You learn from those, not mistakes, but you learn and you grow from them as you continue to evolve your business. And athletes don't have that at all. They usually come right out of the game and they're like, hey, I want to do this. And so I see them making the mistakes, but making the mistakes with the money, compared to, businesses that got to a point where they understand the value of certain things and how to get there correctly instead of trying to nitpick things. And so I tended to see a whole bunch of gaps with a lot of the athletes that I've talked to, where they would have a website, for instance, and they have shirts, and they would be like, well, I haven't sold anything, in 2 years, or dealing with traditional sports marketing agencies that are like, oh, we don't really deal with strategy. And so trying to really hit that gap of really helping the athletes basically brand themselves and in a strategic way, and then grow and monetize their brand outside the game past the fact.
Yeah. So how is branding for an athlete or an athletic based business different than it is for, a traditional business, right? There's a lot of, different agencies out there, a lot of branding agencies that do different things. Beyond the obvious, what is your approach that differs than it would be if I was just a corporation or maybe a coach or a speaker or someone, like that, looking to build my own personal brand?
Well, there of course are a lot of similarities to it. I mean, if you dive into the difference between a personal brand and a corporate brand, for instance, I would say the real difference between the two is a personal brand is when you're evolving it yourself, and a corporate brand is about your employees and your atmosphere and values of everyone in the business, and not just yourself. So for an athlete, they have this ability, and what I always try to tell them is leverage your in-game appearance, leverage what you're doing. A lot of business owners don't have that. Business owners have to start from zero and grow an audience and figure that stuff out from nothing. Where so you as an athlete, you are kind of the next influencer in the fact that people are already seeing you in the game. People are already watching you play. And so you're able to leverage that in either the following or the ability to grow followers from previous media spots or previous engagements that you've had with existing fan bases to be able to grow something unique and share your message and your story with the world. Now, with athletic businesses, it is somewhat similar but different. I mean, a lot of athletic business owners, like myself, get into the business because they're passionate about what they're selling. They're really into the grid of biking or playing football, or it's a lifestyle to them. And so they also have the ability to bring their passions of their business and to use it for their marketing and branding purposes and sharing their experiences with the world when it comes to selling their products or their services. And there's always an intermingle there. I mean, you do have a lot of athletes that they do what they love, so they love to either, do a nonprofit around helping kids. They tend to open a gym. They want to start an e-commerce store and show their positive message to the world. So there's a little bit of overlap there, and sports is all connected in some way, form, or another, so they just, overall, they have this ability to soft sell, and not really hard sell. And I think that really in bringing value to the end users more so than I would say a traditional. And yes, you can go deeper into that and say, you're going B2B or you're going B2C or anything like that. There's a huge way that you have to communicate with them differently. But I think that's all part of the branding, the brand development, and the brand discovery process on really figuring out who your true fan base is and bringing value to those fans.
So, there's a lot of different types of athletes, right? I mean, stating the obvious, but, let's look at it from a fame and a monetary perspective, right? I mean, going to, the Arizona Cardinals, I know you're based out in Phoenix. You get a guy like Carson Palmer who, retires from the NFL, probably has $100 million in the bank. What he wants to do for the rest of his life is very different than, somebody who may have played 4, 5, 6 years in the NFL, maybe made the team on special teams, league minimum guy, maybe signed one contract for a little bit of money. He gets out And, you know, he's got to work, right? Like, I mean, yeah, he's got some money in the bank. Maybe he's got a little bit of fame and notoriety, but, you know, you're not going to live on the money that you put away. How do you look at those two types of athletes when, you know, somebody comes to you? You know, if I'm a kind of a middle of the road, got a little bit of a name, I'm looking to set myself up for my career after sports versus a guy like, you know, whoever it might be, Devin Booker or Chris Paul, who quite frankly are going to retire and never need to work another day in their life.
Yeah, well, I mean, that could go into your qualification matrix a little bit. And I think the difference with us working with athletes compared to, you know, let's just say financial, let's just say a branding firm that works with financial institutions. Well, their matrix is really like, all right, let's just hit anyone with, you know, the psychographic trait of, you know, they make 500,000 more or so a year. Where an athlete, it's not really about the money. It's much more about their personality traits. And so we really try to limit the athletes we work with ones that have that want to leverage their business mindset. So the ones, you know, the second to third string tier athletes that are at a point where they know, hey, what am I going to do after the game? I'm really still passionate about the sport. And that we don't even work on large athletes really like Tom Brady or anything like that. We really focus on helping those second to third string tier athletes, even first string that are close to retirement. What are we going to do after, and how do we invest in ourselves for the future and do it correctly? Those smaller athletes that, let's say, have only been in the league 1 or 2 years, we will more so guide them towards, you know, doing certain things that may not be as expensive, so to say. So we might get them like, hey, what are you passionate about? Why don't you focus on becoming a public speaker? Or why don't you focus on what attributes do you have that you can really value in helping and still doing what you love to do? And I think every athlete is different still, and that's part of the matrix process is, what are you passionate about? What kind of values do you want? What kind of message do you want to bring to the world, and how do you want to help people? So I think the overall strategy is different, but when it comes down to athletes that we work with in particularly, excuse me, we really like to just focus on those athletes that have that business mindset and want to leverage that mindset that they have to grow something outside the game that they're passionate about.
And, you know, I know we talked about this before. You can work with athletes that are a couple of years out of the game. I know there's things you can do, and I know there's value you can bring. But it's really the sweet spot is working with that athlete before they leave the game, right? Preparing them for life after sports. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, it's actually very hard, because through a lot of our research and just a lot of years of trial and error, we have seen that a lot of athletes tend to be so focused in the game, which there's nothing wrong with that they say, hey, I'll wait till next year. I'm too busy with trying to get that next contract or that next this. And what we try to really come in and say, hey, you know, we're more of your branding and marketing management. You know, we really focus on all of that marketing efforts for you. And so it's good to have an agency like us on their side, because they don't have time. Their job right now in their business is being a sports player. So at the end of the day, I tell a lot of athletes, hey, you need to start unfortunately, I have to say, hey, you need to start this now. You know, you do. You need to start before you leave the game while you're still playing. I always recommend, do you have a financial person in place? Do you have, a traditional sports marketer in place that's helping you with those connections and with somewhat of sponsorship opportunities that you may be able to get that you should also use to invest in the future of growing your brand? Because without those set pieces in place, an athlete it's very similar to any business. If you don't have any certain prospects in place, then you're not going to really get there. And I always recommend, hey, work with your financial guy and make sure that you're, pretty sure that this is the direction you want to go. Or if they already have something going, how can we make it better? How can we improve it? But long story short, it is very important, especially with NIL coming out right now. I see a lot of professional athletes seeing that as well as, hey, focus on this before you leave the game. Yes, you don't have to put 100% time and effort into it, but it's very much like someone that leaves the corporate world and starts a side business, before they make the transition. It's very similar, but you need to start it sooner than later if you're passionate about it.
When you think about an athlete who's preparing to leave the game and you think about their personal brand building, where do they usually take it? Like, is this something where it now becomes about becoming a, corporate speaker, or to do sort of personal life coaching, or potentially opening up, maybe actually doing athletic coaching? Like, where is, from your experience, where do most of these athletes who do this well go next?
I see multiple models. And of course, one of the main directions athletes go is they invest in other companies. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I always have to tell athletes, there's nothing wrong with investing in other companies, but make sure you do your due diligence, because 90% of businesses fail and you have no control over the outcome of that business. I won't say names, but I had a company come to me that had 2 athlete investors on staff, and they were coming to us about some online search capabilities. And I was looking over their follower account, and they had about 1 million followers, but they had like 3 likes per post. And they were like, oh, our investors don't know the difference. We just paid for fake followers. And to me, in my mind, I'm like, that's not a good way to start, And so we actually turned them down to work with them because we just didn't feel like it was an ethical client to work with. But back to your question, it was like what I said earlier. A lot of them tend to fall into certain patterns, and we will work with an athlete within any industry they provide. But I think that it always comes back to one simple thing. They're the personal brand around their business. And so if they're a public, like we said earlier, they do tend to either open a nonprofit foundation, or they tend to, open a gym. They tend to have an e-commerce store where they want to sell products. We're working with an athlete right now, and we're actually developing them their own backpack around his brand, his personality, and what he likes to do on the side, on his lifestyle side. And so it's one of those situations where we really try to help that athlete, manage the marketing side effectively, so that they can make a good profit margin from that. Because I've seen the trends that I really see are that I'd see either they open a gym, they open a foundation, or they want to start an e-commerce store. But there's always cryptotherapy is becoming a thing now. And things of that nature. One thing that athletes have that a lot of other business owners don't have is it's easier for them to connect with other people. And so they have the ability to make these partnerships and book these conferences and do this stuff where normal businesses have to have a grind and have to pay a lot more money, to get to that position. And so a lot of the trends I kind of see athletes doing right now is unfortunately the traditional sports marketing environment is very old school. They'll just outsource stuff to freelancers, not understanding how certain things work, and they'll tend to do what I told you with that one athlete where he had a store and wasn't selling anything, or they look at affiliate marketing quite a bit too, and like, oh, I have these links and I'll just throw up some links, and I'm like, I have to explain to them the amount of effort they're putting in to make 50 cents doesn't really benefit the weight of costs there. So if they just focused a little bit on strategy up front and during their process of building, and understood the value of, like you and I were talking about before the call, a painter doesn't paint their own house. And so there's nothing wrong with them not understanding that stuff, but it's one of those situations where, yes, you could be paying more for something, but at the end of the day, that's going to give you a much higher result than you trying to nitpick these things from cheap solutions.
You mentioned crypto, and it's interesting, right? You're seeing athletes that are actually asking to get paid their salary or portions of their salary in, Bitcoin or other different type of cryptocurrencies. There's obviously speculation, people who are just, buying and holding and buying all these different kind of obscure cryptos. And, you're seeing these cryptos that are, going up, 14,000% in a year, right? It's a little bit of a lottery ticket, but, saw a post the other day. I forgot the athlete who it was, but he was discouraged because he sold, $20,000 worth of Shiba Inu, which would have been worth like $4 billion if he held on to it or something to that extent. But the part that I'm interested in, I want to hear your take on it, is the growth of the NFT world. Right. You have autograph.io that's out there now. I think Tom Brady is one of the investors and is on the board of directors there. You see people like Tiger Woods and, all these major athletes that are involved. I've worked with a company actually based in Phoenix called The Fen. They're doing a lot of work with Juju Smith-Schuster. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that NFT world plays into what you're doing and the conversations you're having with athletes.
I've actually had a couple talks with some NFT companies that are trying to get started, and I think that there's nothing wrong with NFTs. I think they're a new fad. I'm not saying they're going to be good or bad, but it's something that you said on that hit on a little bit ago, which to me is lottery. And 1%, like that athlete you said. Yes, it would suck not to make $4 billion off of something, but I'm not one to fancy into lottery situations. I think that you need to, diversify where your income comes in, and I don't see anything wrong with that. I'd of course talk to a financial person before anything like that, but I think that in business you have control. You have control over the outcome. You pivot, you can do different things, you can have strategy, blah, blah, blah. But long story short is I think NFTs can play a great situation in the outcome. One problem I am seeing through a lot of these NFTs is they're doing something very similar to what I said, is there a lot of these designs and a lot of these art pieces of art that they're making, they're not seeing the cost to benefit ratio. And so they're going out there and they're creating something themselves, or they're creating something that is, made for $100, and then they're expecting for it to sell for 100 times, a million times more than that. When in reality, it's just like business. You have to put, with anything, you have to put a solid investment into something to get less risk to make more return, so I would just say it's great, but I think that it's just another avenue that's kind of diminishing good quality on other fields, like the design industry and, the development industry and things of that nature. But I definitely think it's if an athlete talks to a financial advisor or something like that, and they want to invest in something that they see, it's up to the athlete with risk, So, and like you've mentioned, if they have a good business plan, or they have a good portfolio, then, that diminishes risk. So why not throw money into it? But I wouldn't make that your long-term goal. I would probably use that as something, just like in business, you really thrive you're always striving to be better. You're always striving to, just like a player does when they're playing the game, you're always striving to make things better, to bring value to the end user, to have passion in what you do and have a meaning, and I think that that's more of something that I would say you would do on the side as you try to do something else with your life.
So I know one of the things you guys have at Creatitive is a brand build process, tried and true process that you put together. Talk to me a little bit about where the creative process starts. When you engage with a new athlete, let's say it's somebody who's fairly well known, coming towards the latter part of their career, and they're planning for life after sports. Where do you guys start?
We usually start a lot with the brand. The part of the brand build process is dived into 3 steps. And a lot of those 3 steps even has different situations that could arise depending on the athlete and where they want to go. But how we usually start the first step of the brand build process is the brand development side. And it's really, developing, brand discovery, figuring out, working with the athlete to figure out who their true fan base is, and doing workshops on developing their values and their copy and their messaging, their positioning statement, their graphics and their brand language, and really coming down to how do we objectively and not subjectively, provide branding collateral and branding solutions for you that can go for what your overall goal is. And so we first start off with that. And there's a huge, that part usually takes between 1 or 3 months, depending on the part of the brand build process they're in. And then, we really focus on, with athletes, I think one of the biggest things that I see a lot of is athletes tend to say, hey, I just want a website and I want to just throw up my stats. And I'm like, there's plenty of websites out there that companies can see your stats, but how does that help the end user? Like, what are you trying to use the website for? Don't just look at it as you're paying for something, you're buying a product that people can just view you on. Look at it as, hey, what value are you bringing to that end user, and how are you going to monetize that website in a way? So we really go through, the second step is really the website discovery process, where we go through and we actually define what the end user would flow through on the website, what with the audiences that we've come up with, we're able to psychologically look at, okay, what kind of information would they be looking up? What kind of value are you bringing to them? And we design the website around that, and so that they can monetize it. For instance, we really think there's a huge aspect for a lot of these nonprofits to start developing their own crowdfunding website. I mean, I look at JJ Watt, for instance, and when he did Hurricane Katrina, and a lot of them just go up and they do a Kickstarter campaign, and he made how much, 14 million off of Hurricane Katrina. And if he just spent 20 to 30 grand on developing his own crowdfunding website, he would have a platform that he could have, spent 1/10 of the cost that he had to pay Kickstarter to develop his own. And then he could have had multiple campaigns he could have ran as he continued his journey. And so that's just one example, but trying to find a way that we can bring all of your assets together that you're submitting out there is what we like to call your digital currency. And we try to say, hey, how do we bring all that together? And then how do we inform it, give that information to your end user properly? Because your website's meant to more so that's yours. It's not like social media where, you could get banned tomorrow, or, they could do updates or situations. And so we like to use that as a place for your hub, if it be business, if it be, anything. And then we go through that process second. And then once that's live and completed, then we come up with the market. We have the marketing strategy side, and we come up with solutions that we think are best going to fit your personality, for one, but two, where your end user is. And so one thing that I really tell athletes when they come to us and they say, hey, well, we need to post more. And I have to tell them, well, which channels are your users on? I don't think that you need to be blasting every single social media channel. Let's focus on quality and focus on hitting those channels that your end user is on with quality content and quality value. And so it varies, but we pick a couple of channels. We may pick, depending on the user intent, we may focus on some paid marketing, or we may focus on some organic search marketing as well, if they're local or if they're, an e-commerce store, to help them bring in value. And then we help tell their story through different aspects of marketing. to kind of help them continually to grow the business from that aspect. And so those are usually the three phases of the brand build process. But it usually, like I tell every client that comes to me, if they don't have any sort of brand or website or anything yet, I usually have to back off and say, hey man, you need this stuff first, or we're not going to be able to provide the value that you're looking out of us. And so I always recommend athletes, go through some brand discovery, come up with some sort of strategy, get to know themselves. It's really a way to get to know themselves and to get to know who they're passionate about and who they want to help in the environment of today's world.
Yeah. I mean, with any marketing, there's an authenticity that's so important, right? And if you're trying to create a brand that isn't authentic to who you are and what you believe in, it's going to fall flat. I think that one of the things with JJ Watt, and what he was able to do as far as raising capital is you could just feel like when he would talk that there was just a deep level of passion there, right? It was something he believed in, he wanted to do, he wanted to help with. And I think that resonated, and it's one of the reasons why he was able to raise the amount of money that he was able to raise. So I kind of a two-part question here. We've talked a little bit about that athlete that may be looking to figure out how they're going to be prepared for life after sports. So in nature, you're talking about people who are maybe towards the latter part of their careers. But you're starting to see this happen earlier and earlier and earlier. And we talked about this offline where with the ability for amateur athletes to now monetize their name, likeness, et cetera. We're starting to see it at the high school levels, right? Mikey Williams, basketball player, 17 years old, just signed a historic contract with Puma. I mean, Puma's, basically a basketball contract. This kid's not even in college yet, right? 5 million social followers across Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. So, I guess the question really is, when do athletes need to start thinking about this? I mean, is this something that these top level high school guys, these top level college guys, like they got to already start to kind of think about the brand that they want to create, because we know how lucrative sponsorships can be. Just from that level, we kind of have an idea of what sponsors are looking for in athletes. But where would you recommend that these conversations start to occur?
I mean, the easy answer I would say is yes, but we've actually been approached by, in the last year alone, quite a bit of high school athletes and college athletes. And I think that they need to look at, one, every state we're coming to realize with NIL is different depending on their laws. And so I think first and foremost, they really need to dive into where they're located, what the rules and regulations are for that. But I don't think athletes of high school or even maybe college, but not so as much high school, should be worrying about sponsors yet. I think that at the end of the day, their main focus should be on what kind of school do I want to go to, and how does that, high school athletes, when you're in high school in general, you're all over the place. You're like, am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? And things change. And so for one athlete we were working with, when we were going through the brand build process that was in high school, a female soccer player, we were focusing much more on, well, what are her passions outside the game that she's getting passionate about with schooling? Because if we look at it that way, then who knows what's going to happen after college? Who knows if she's going to become professional? Who knows? And for her, for instance, she had a real true passion for animals. And so she was thinking about becoming a veterinarian. So we're like, so how do we build your brand around you and your sport, but also be able to leverage this passion you have for animals? And how do we push that in that direction? So if things do shift over time, you can kind of take it into a different direction. And maybe it's not sponsors at that point. Maybe it's just trying to, grow your career as a veterinarian, or a foundation towards animals or something of that nature. So for high school athletes, it's really all about getting to know themselves and nurturing. At the end of the day, this is not just for athletes, but for for athletic businesses, for business in general, social media is not meant for lead generation. It's just not. It's meant for value and to nurture. So it's one of those situations where you want to build an audience, and that's it. You want to bring value, free content, be able to help people out. Very similar to this podcast. You're trying to bring value to help people in what they're doing, give them advice, give them inspiration. And so for high school, it's much more about how do we get your name out there more, because you can't necessarily go out and reach out to recruiters. You can't. And I've had a few of them come to me and be like, well, do you know this recruiter? Can you get us this? I'm like, even if we did, it wouldn't be appropriate because that's not how it works. And with NIL, you have to worry about that kind of stuff. And so let's build your brand early. If we can build you and nurture your following early enough, and you just look at it as a nurturing and a growth development situation, by the time that you get into college or by the time you get into the sport that you're going to be playing professionally, you will at least have a solid foundation of followers through the PR and the efforts that we provide. Now, depending on if they go into college, I'm seeing two things. I'm seeing it's forcing professional athletes to look back and say, hey, maybe I should have took this seriously. But it's also, I'm seeing a lot of college athletes getting sponsorship deals that they shouldn't be taking, because a lot of these corporate companies, not all, but some, are now looking at it as these are naive kids that don't know what they're getting into, and we can pay them very little money to sponsor for us. And so I'm seeing a lot of college kids actually getting taken advantage of and getting sponsorship deals with things that just don't mesh with what they believe in. And so with college, finding your brand and finding who you are is very important, because it's going to help you find partnerships, not just regular sponsorships, but partnerships that could grow into a future aspect of who you are as a person and who you are. I mean, I had one come to me and say they got a sponsorship from McDonald's, and I'm like, dude, like, how does that work with your brand? You're all about health and fitness and showing people inspiration, but McDonald's, I'm like, how does that relate to your brand? And vice versa. I've had athletes come to me and say, hey, I've been offered sponsorship deals where they're going to pay me $600 and I have to post 7 times for the next year every month. And I'm like, dude, you're getting ripped off. So I think they just have to take it with a grain of salt, and they just have to kind of look at it and say, hey, these people are coming to them. Let everyone come to you. I would say, hey, don't worry about, especially when you're in college, doing too much due diligence on trying to find sponsors. Focus on your schooling and focus on your sport, and let these people come to you, and then you can digest if any of those sponsorships are good for you or not, and leverage that. And that goes back to strategy. Like you said, if a high school player decides, hey, when I'm in 6th or 7th grade, I have found that my brand really resonates with, and we'll just use it because everyone knows it, Nike, and they are, wearing their shoes, and they're looking at it as a value proposition and sharing some content for them for free, while they're young, then eventually they may get that huge sponsorship deal with Nike. But use it as much more of a nurturing aspect, and a much more of how do I build my brand now, and how do I build that brand awareness now, so that by the time I get to college, schools will be looking at me. By the time I get to the professional level, as you know, sports teams are tricky. It's a business to them. And so having a player that's really good is great, but having a player that is a people person, and, unfortunately, their teams, their main goal is to bring in ticket sales, so if they can have a player that they know is genuine to what they do and genuine to who they are as a person, and they talk to their fans, I see a lot of athletes that talk about and preach about how they want to be on social media more, but they don't talk to their fans. They go on there and they'll either not comment at all, they'll do just a thumbs up, or they'll say, hey, thanks for the post. And it's like, no, talk to them. That's the whole point of social media, is to show your quality, that's what you're providing value to them as an athlete, is you're able to talk to them where other people can't. So, just kind of take it as it goes. And and expect that whole portion to be a nurturing aspect. And it's going to take longer before you either go and open your own business or you either play in your career, but business doesn't happen overnight either. Neither should sponsorships. And I see a lot of athletes taking $5,000 sponsorship deals right now, or taking those deals that don't really mesh with their brand just to make a quick $5,000. And I'm like, wouldn't you rather have $100,000 sponsorship with a company that has the same fan base as you? And that's really what not marketing, but what really large companies look at is, hey, does this company resonate with our audience? And even if they have 10,000 followers, 50,000 compared to 1 million, what's going to be that conversion rate? And that's what companies look at. Unfortunately, that just is, because that's their goal, is they want to make more sales. And so if you're passionate about something and you're passionate about a product and it follows your values and your what you do as an athlete, those are the types of sponsorships you should be taking.
I come from an era where athletes, college athletes at the time weren't even allowed to have part-time jobs. We weren't allowed to go get a job, delivering pizzas. So I've actually been a supporter of, this movement where amateur athletes are able to monetize themselves. I mean, you just look at the billions of dollars that are created in, NCAA sports, whether it's the tournament in basketball, whether it's the BCS in football. And, at the end of the day, like, the product are the players on the field. And I get it. Yeah, they get a scholarship and all those types of things. But I mean, the fact that the coaches are making $10 million a year, I don't know where the money goes. I mean, who is the NCAA exactly? Like, I'd love to ever put my thumb on exactly what that cartel looks like. But so I've been supportive of that, but I do think it is going to change everything. And I don't think it's always going to change things for the best, right? I mean, you look at Mikey Williams, we talked about him earlier, signed a deal with Puma. Mikey Williams isn't the number one basketball player in the country right now. I think he's ranked like 10th or something to that extent, of where he sits in his age class for who he is. The reason he got a contract is because he's got 5 million followers and it's going to continue to grow, right? And we all know that they can monetize their followers. And every time he's wearing his Puma shoes or his Puma shirts, there's value that he's going to bring to the corporate level. So then, it begs the question of, are athletes now going to be more focused with doing things that, it's kind of like what you see with like the Kim Kardashian world, right? Or the Jake Pauls of the world, where it's like, it's not even about what you do. It's about doing something that creates a little bit of controversy and gets you more followers and helps kind of get your social presence and helps you go viral, where now it's like, are you really focused even on training or being the best athlete you can be? So I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But listen, the show, when I started the show, it wasn't just about athletes per se and what they were going to do afterwards. I look at athlete entrepreneurship as an approach. It's like a mindset, and it's the way you approach entrepreneurship. So before we go, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask some questions about your own entrepreneurial journey, right? I mean, you talked about it. You were in the corporate world for a really long time. You could easily be at some big agency right now. You're an extremely talented marketer, visual designer, art director, all those types of things, but you decided to go out on your own. So I'd love to hear, you just give me a quick rundown and maybe some of the lessons you've learned or some of the biggest lessons you've learned on your own entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I think that it doesn't happen overnight. I think that, I think there's a lot of people out there now preaching that they have to understand that business doesn't happen overnight. And it's hard as a business owner when you're passionate to look at something 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from now and say, I think I should be further than this. But then you look back at a year and you're like, oh, I'm actually further than I thought I was. And it's that mindset that you said. I'm very similar to you in that way, where I look at an athlete's lifestyle and their mindset towards becoming an athlete, very similar to entrepreneurship and opening your own business. Is I came to the realization quite fast that my whole goal in the business is, yes, to help athletes, but to help athletes understand that time doesn't equal money. Money equals time. And so you want that. You want to be able to hang out with your family. You want to be able to take care of your kids. You want to be able to do that, but do it. You could still do it with something that's fun. And that's one thing that I learned quite early on is, hey, you're going to have expenses. You're going to have, to bring the quality you want to bring to these people, you're going to have to hire the best that there is out there to help you along your way. I'll say that I'm a master of none, and I'm a, what's the term? Master of none, but whatever, of everything.
Jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades. Yeah. But what I learned from that is I learned enough to say, hey, now I know how to hire this person, and say, hey, I'm going to bring this person. He does better at it than I do, but I know enough to make that 10 times better with my end user. So I would say expenses, and I'd say, not being nitpicky, but also don't follow, fake gurus. There's so much content out there these days that talk about certain things like, hey, you can make $1 million tomorrow if you just do this, or you can do this and this. You can make $1 million in anything. You just have to, business is hard. Business, and just like being a player, is hard. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. It's going to take a lot of uncomfortable situations that you have to learn past. And that's what I love about business is I realized I wanted to get into it because I like change, and business is always learning. It's always changing, and I'm always learning something new. And some of the things I do have to, do on a daily basis is, my mindset. It wasn't until my agency was bigger that I realized how important mindset was. And so, really focusing on knowing that there's going to be days that I'm depressed, because I'm not far enough, but also realizing that that's just part of the business mindset, and that I'll get over it, and things are going to come up with millions of different things that you're going to have to tackle on a day-to-day basis. Finding people that you can talk to or grow with. I'm part of a huge organization that's not really about networking, but more about a support group for business owners. Business owners think alike. And so being able to talk to people that maybe in different industries or different situations that can help you understand they're going through similar pain points. It's a very different mindset. And so that's a pain point. Pivoting, of course, with COVID. I mean, I'm in the marketing world, and I'm in the sports realm. So I got hit twice when it came to COVID, and so really learning how to pivot and be able to move things when necessary to grow, but also sticking to gun with your passions. I've had multiple business developers in the past, and all of them said, don't work with athletes. Athletes, it's going to be hard to niche on athletes. It's going to be hard to get in front of athletes. But if you hit a tree in the same spot long enough, you're going to get somewhere. So just learning to grow from past mistakes and grow from them is huge. But I would say overall, you have to love it. And with loving it comes the tedious work sometimes, knowing that you're going to have to hand things off. You're going to have to learn new skill sets, but you're going to have to hand those off to other companies or to employees that probably do it better than you do.
Yeah. I a lot of times I'll hire people or I'll be interviewing people and recruiting them, and I have to explain to them, like, listen, I'm in this role within this company, but you're better than me at this job I'm bringing you in, right? Like I can't be better than you at marketing, or I can't be better than you at finance if you're going to run finance for this organization. And I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs need to get comfortable with. The fact that you have to hire great people. You have to hire people around you that are better than you. And I think for some, I know earlier in my career in leadership roles, I think you feel like you have to be this superhero to be a CEO of a company or to be a founder, right? And you have to almost put up this front of, I know more than everybody here. Nobody knows as much as me. And you can almost get a little bit self-conscious if you feel like you're maybe not as smart as somebody else that's around you, that's in the room. You always feel like you have to be the smartest person in the room. And I think with experience and with wisdom, you realize if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, like you have to bring people to the table that are better than you in certain things, right? Like that's how your team grows.
And I think that it's funny you say that, because I've had this happen with not just people and I think this happens a lot with athletes, because like I said, they come out and they want to do everything themselves because of that passion and not understanding certain pain points up front. But I see it with corporate businesses too. I've had a couple come to me that are small and they're moving to the medium-sized realm, and they're like, hey, I'm going to hire everyone in-house. And I have to sit down with them and I have to say, I love your goal to get there. They're like, I want to be like McDonald's. I want to have a marketing department. I want to do this. I want to do that. I'm like, you have one location right now. I'm like, let's sit down and look at what employees I have to get this job done. A marketing person is not just someone that does everything. They're not a jack of all trades. They need to have someone that specifically works on like search engine optimization, for instance, social media, content writing, graphic design, and that there's multiple fields in there. And so I agree with you. I think that a lot of people really don't understand that it's an evolutionary direction. And yeah, I do agree. Hey, don't hire those people if you're not ready, but you want to get the best, but you also have to pay for the best. And so you have to wait till you get to a certain spot and a certain point in your business to do that. And you may be doing stuff yourself for a while. But what my biggest thing is that I've started doing is we've really started pushing our hiring process lately is what keeps me up at night? Like what keeps me up at night with my clients? What stuff makes it where, and I'm a business owner, so a lot of stuff keeps me up at night, but what are the main things that I can hand off to someone just so I don't have to have that emotional connection between certain things going wrong or certain right. And I could have my employee be the one that doesn't bring on that burden, but helps alleviate and bring more quality to that. And I think that really helped me at the beginning as I started saying what is really appropriate before I actually sat down and created a matrix of my hiring and who I had. But I 100% agree with you. It's something that everyone needs to somewhat look at, especially athletes. Like I said, we try not to even work with athletes that don't have some sort of financial institution that they're working with or a traditional sports marketer that could somewhat help them, because we don't do sponsorships. That's not our thing. We say, hey, we'll help bring you more value to existing sponsors or future sponsors so that you can get paid more money and you can kind of move into the direction of your fan base. But we don't do that because we are a full service marketing and branding agency, but there's only so much we can do within what we do. So we bring partners on for that because we know that we can't do everything in the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. So look, Zach, where can people go to learn more about you and what you're working on?
Anywhere. I mean, they can go YouTube. You can find us at just search Creatitive on YouTube, Instagram at Creatitive. Our website's Creatitive, and our LinkedIn business profile is Creatitive as well.
Awesome. And I'll include that all in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, you can go down and click on those links. But I appreciate you coming on, man. Really, really fun conversation. I think you bring a very different perspective to people out there listening to this, not coming necessarily from the athlete side of it, but actually thinking about how do you advise these athletes and which of these athletes be thinking about as they're looking to think about life after sports.
Well, I appreciate you having me on.